Hey everyone, are you ready for this? We've gotten so many requests for a deep dive into Trump's peace plan for Ukraine.
Yeah.
And, uh, we've got a great article that breaks down his claims and potential strategy and names some key players.
hmm
And talk about timing. I mean, with that drone attack in Ukraine last week, this is pretty relevant right now, right?
It really is. It really underscores how urgent this is.
Yeah.
Um, One of the interesting things is that Trump's claiming he could have ended the war fast
Oh,
if
wow.
he was still
If
president.
he was still president,
Yeah.
like, quickly.
Yeah, swiftly.
That's a bold statement.
Bold statement for sure.
So, okay, so let's dig into that a little. I mean, past peace talks haven't really worked out, have they?
No, not really. They've kind of stumbled over some really big problems. One of the main things is that Russia's security concerns haven't really addressed.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
feel threatened by NATO expansion, and past negotiations haven't really calmed those fears.
Yeah.
And the second thing is Ukraine needs really strong guarantees for its own safety
Of course.
if they're going to agree to any deal.
Yeah,
And those guarantees just haven't happened in a way that satisfies both sides.
right, yeah, that makes sense. So where does Trump think he can succeed here? The article talks about strength and diplomacy being like the core of his approach.
Right.
What does that even mean, like in real life?
Well, let's look back at how Trump dealt with North Korea.
Oh, okay.
Remember those meetings with Kim Jong-un?
Huh.
Lots of tough talks and military posturing, but he was also willing to sit down and negotiate directly.
Yeah.
It's possible he sees that as something similar he can do with Putin.
Okay, so like a good cop, bad cop thing, but on an international level.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And speaking of key players, the article mentions Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg.
Right.
He's Trump's special envoy and like a close friend of his, right?
Wow.
What's the big deal about sending him over to Kyiv?
Yeah, I mean, Kellogg's appointment is pretty significant.
Okay.
First off, sending someone with his history with Trump really shows that they are serious about talking directly with Ukraine,
Okay.
at least with Ukraine.
Right.
But there's a second layer to this. Think like back-channel diplomacy.
Oh.
Kellogg is likely to be the guy having those behind-the-scenes conversations, maybe even with Russia.
Oh, now that's interesting. So could we see Kellogg heading over to Moscow next?
Potentially.
I mean, because let's be real, no peace deal is going to work unless Russia's actually involved, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, getting Ukraine on board is super important,
Yeah.
but Russia holds a lot of power here.
Right.
Direct dialogue, even if it's tricky, it's the only way to know if they're even willing to talk,
Yeah.
let alone make compromises.
Okay, so what about the goal of all of this?
Right.
The article says Trump wants a fair, sustainable, and secure peace. That sounds great on paper, but how do you even start to define those terms when you've got these two sides with like totally opposite views?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Honestly, it's messy.
Yeah.
A truly fair peace means addressing Ukrainian and Russian concerns.
Okay.
So for Ukraine, it's territorial integrity, it's security guarantees. For Russia, it's addressing their worries about NATO
Okay.
and potentially some sort of recognition of their, interests in that region.
So it's not just about drawing lines on a map. It's about figuring out all this distrust and all these conflicting goals that go way back.
Exactly.
That's a lot.
And the sustainable part.
Yeah.
Well, that means making sure this doesn't just erupt again in a couple of years.
Right.
It means getting to the root of the conflict.
Not just like putting a Band-Aid on it.
Exactly.
Okay. And Kellogg seems to be putting pressure on Europe, too,
Right.
saying they need to step up and take more responsibility. What's that all about?
Well, he's basically telling them to increase their defense spending. And this ties back into that 2% of GDP target that
Yeah.
all NATO members are supposed to reach.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, including Germany, aren't doing that.
Hold on, Germany. Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, isn't pulling their weight.
That's right.
Wow.
And in contrast, you have countries like Poland, they're actually going above and beyond that target.
Really?
Yeah, showing they're committed to strengthening their defenses and really contributing more to NATO.
Wow.
So it's a mixed bag.
It's a real mixed bag. Okay, so we've got the U.S. sending tons of aid to Ukraine,
Right.
pressure on Europe to give more money for defense.
Yeah.
But what about Russia? What's their incentive to even want to come to these talks?
Well, now that is the puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
The article doesn't give any specifics about how Trump would encourage Russia to do this. But some options that have been talked about before are offering relief from sanctions, giving them certain security guarantees, or even considering territorial concessions.
Whoa. Hold on. Those sound like some pretty big things to offer. Are those even realistic?
Well,
What are the potential downsides?
it's a tough situation, definitely. Sanctions relief, if it's given too quickly or without Russia really giving anything in return,
Yeah.
it could be seen as the wrong message.
Yeah.
Putin might see that as the sign of weakness, and other countries who maybe want to stir up trouble might think they can get away with the same things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Like, it rewards bad behavior globally.
Exactly.
Right.
And when it comes to territorial concessions,
Oh, boy.
yeah, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
We're talking about people's homes, lives, their identities.
Yeah.
Ethically, it's super complicated, and legally, it could be a really bad precedent,
Yeah.
where borders are seen as something that can be changed based on the desires of powerful countries.
Wouldn't that also make other countries nervous? Like, hey, if they can take a piece of Ukraine, what's stopping them from coming after us?
Right. Absolutely, that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Concessions, if they're not handled very, very carefully, could actually lead to more aggression,
Oh, wow.
not just from Russia, but from other countries who might want to exploit the situation.
Yeah, so striking the right balance is tricky,
It is.
to say the least.
Yeah.
You need to offer enough to get Russia to even talk, but not so much that you sacrifice your principles or global security.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
And, and this is where it gets kind of interesting because the article doesn't go into detail about Trump's actual strategy.
Right.
So we're left trying to read between the lines,
Yeah.
considering his past moves and his tendency to shake things up.
I mean, let's face it,
Right.
Trump's track record with foreign policy is, let's just say it's caused a lot of debate.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Some people would argue that his unpredictability was a good thing.
Sure.
It kept other world leaders on edge.
Other people would probably say it caused more trouble than anything else.
It did. It created more chaos than anything else.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
Trump is known for not following typical diplomatic rules
Mm-hmm.
and just going with his gut in negotiations.
Yeah.
Whether that will be successful here, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's like watching a high-stakes poker game where you can't see the players' cards.
Right.
You can't even figure out what the rules are.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And the stakes in this game are incredibly high.
Yeah.
Millions of lives are at stake.
Yeah.
The future of Europe, the possibility of this conflict spiraling out of control.
Okay, so while we can't predict what's going to happen,
Right.
this article gives us a little bit of insight into Trump's thinking, his possible approach to Ukraine.
Right.
Right.
And maybe more importantly, it makes us think about just how complicated this situation really is.
Yeah.
There's no easy solution,
Right.
no magic wand to wave. Yeah.
To get peace, you have to understand history.
Yeah.
You have to navigate these global power dynamics.
Yeah.
And you have to recognize the human cost of this conflict.
It's a tangled web,
It is.
for sure. But hopefully this deep dive is helping you untangle some of those threads a little bit.
Right. And it's so important to stay informed as this story unfolds.
Yeah.
Things change so quickly, and anything new that happens could really impact the chances for peace.
Okay, so to make sure we're all on the same page,
Yeah.
let's go over what we've learned.
Okay.
Trump's plan seems to rely on a few key things.
Right.
1, Russia actually being willing to talk.
Right.
2, European allies stepping up and giving more money and military support.
Right.
And 3, whatever out-of-the-box strategy Trump himself brings to the table.
Exactly.
All right.
But let's not forget, even if all of that happens, there's absolutely no guarantee that it'll work.
Right.
This is so complex, and there's so many factors that nobody can control.
Okay.
It's a lot to think about. All right, folks, that's the end of part 1 of our deep dive into Trump's peace plan for Ukraine. But stay tuned, because in part 2, we're going to dig even deeper into the potential problems and unintended consequences of these ideas.
Right.
And we'll explore what this approach could mean for the whole world. You don't want to miss it.
No. So welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the different tools in this peace plan. Things like giving relief from sanctions and territorial concessions.
Right.
These are really big bargaining chips.
Yeah.
And they could have consequences that reach way beyond Ukraine.
It's almost like trying to defuse a bomb, right?
Yeah.
One wrong move and it could blow up in your face.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that could go wrong? Some of those unintended consequences?
Well, you bring up a really good point. Let's take sanctions relief, for example.
Yeah.
If that happens too quickly, or without Russia actually making compromises, it could send a bad message.
Yeah.
Putin might see it as weakness.
Right.
And other countries that want to cause problems
Yeah.
might think they can get away with being aggressive too.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
It's like we're rewarding bad behavior on the world stage.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And when it comes to territorial concessions, well, that opens up a whole other set of problems.
Boy, yeah.
We're talking about people's homes, people's lives, their identities.
Of course, yeah.
It's a really difficult issue ethically.
Yeah.
And legally, it could set a really dangerous example
Yeah.
where borders are seen as something that can just be changed whenever powerful countries want.
Yeah. Wouldn't that make other countries nervous too?
Absolutely.
Like, hey, if they can take a piece of Ukraine, what's to stop them from taking something from us?
That's a very valid concern.
Right.
Concessions, if they aren't handled really, really carefully, could actually encourage more aggression,
Wow.
not just from Russia, but from other countries who might see a chance to take advantage.
It sounds like it's going to be really hard to find the right balance.
It's tricky.
You've got to offer enough to get Russia to even talk,
Yeah.
but not so much that you give up what you believe in or risk global security.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
And this is where the article gets kind of interesting because it doesn't really explain what Trump's actual strategy is.
Yeah.
So we're kind of left to guess.
Yeah.
Looking at what he's done in the past, his tendency to do things his own way.
Let's be real. Trump's history with foreign policy is,
Well, yeah,
let's just say it's caused a lot of discussion.
it has.
Some people might say his unpredictability was a good thing.
Yeah.
Kept other world leaders on their toes.
Yeah, it kept them guessing.
Others would probably say it caused more problems than it solved.
It definitely caused more chaos.
Yeah, right.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Trump is known for breaking the usual rules of diplomacy.
Right.
And just trusting his instincts in negotiations.
Yeah.
Who knows if that'll work here?
It's like watching a high-stakes poker game where you can't see anyone's cards.
Yeah.
And you don't even know what the rules are.
Right. That's a perfect analogy.
Right.
And the stakes in this game are incredibly high.
Yeah.
We're talking about millions of lives, the future of Europe, the potential for this conflict to spread.
So even though we don't know what will happen, this article at least helps us understand a little bit about how Trump thinks and his potential approach to this situation in Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe even more importantly, it makes us really think about how complex this whole thing is.
It really is.
There's no easy solution.
No.
There's no magic wand you can wave.
Right.
Achieving peace means understanding the history behind it.
Right.
Dealing with these global power dynamics.
Yeah.
And recognizing the real human cost of this conflict.
Yeah. It's a complicated mess.
It is.
But hopefully this deep dive is helping to make sense of it.
Absolutely. And it's so important to stay informed.
Yes.
Things are changing all the time, and any new development could change everything.
I want to go back to something we were discussing earlier.
Sure.
About Trump calling for NATO to spend more.
Yeah.
That 5% of GDP demand, that really got people's attention.
It did.
Why is defense spending such a sensitive issue?
Well, it's important to understand why this is such a hot topic, especially within NATO.
Yeah.
Remember, NATO is a collective defense alliance.
Yeah.
They all agree that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Strength in numbers. Right.
Exactly. But for decades now, the U.S. has been shouldering most of the burden,
Okay.
both financially and militarily.
Right.
And that was something that really bothered Trump when he was president.
Yeah, he was pretty vocal about other NATO members not contributing enough.
Right. He argued that American taxpayers were paying for the security of wealthy European countries that weren't doing their part.
So this 5% demand, that's basically him continuing that argument.
Yeah, even though he's not in office anymore.
Even though he's not in office. Wow.
It shows his belief that Europe needs to take care of its own defense more
Yeah.
and give more to the alliance.
But isn't there a risk that pushing so hard could backfire?
No.
Especially now when we need everyone to work together to solve this crisis in Ukraine?
It's definitely a valid concern.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, more European defense spending would make NATO stronger,
Okay.
and it might make Russia think twice about doing anything.
Right.
But on the other hand, if it seems like we're trying to force our allies to do something, it could cause divisions.
Right.
It could weaken the alliance from the inside.
So Trump's way of dealing with NATO is just as unconventional and potentially disruptive as his way of dealing with the Ukraine conflict itself.
That's a good way to put it.
Right.
It's hard to say if his demands will make the alliance stronger in the long run.
Yeah.
It's a gamble, that's for sure.
We've discussed a lot in this part.
We have.
We've looked at the complexities and potential consequences of Trump's proposed peace plan. Yeah.
But there's another layer we need to consider.
Right.
In part 3, we're going to step back and look at the bigger picture,
Okay.
how this approach might affect the whole world. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Trump's peace plan for Ukraine. We've talked about the potential strategies, the people involved, even those tough decisions about what to offer and what the risks might be. But now let's zoom out a bit
Okay.
and look at the bigger picture.
Right. We need to think about what this could mean for the whole world.
Yeah.
You know, Trump talking about strength and diplomacy, him wanting NATO to spend more, his unusual way of negotiating. All of that sends a message to our allies and to countries that might be against us.
So what's the message here? Is this like America changing its foreign policy?
It could be. There's definitely this feeling of going back to that America first way of doing things.
Right.
You know, putting American interests first.
Yeah.
Even if that means shaking things up or putting pressure on our allies. So it's different from that more collaborative approach we've seen in recent years.
Maybe. Yeah. It could be more about going it alone and less about working together.
And how will other countries react to this?
Right.
Especially those that have relied on the U.S. for leadership and support.
That's the big question.
Yeah.
I think reactions will be all over the place.
Okay.
Some allies, especially those worried about Russia or other powerful countries in their region,
Yeah.
might actually like the U.S. being more assertive,
Okay.
you know?
Right. But I can also imagine others getting nervous.
Right.
Like, what if they get caught in the middle of a fight between the U.S. and Russia?
Exactly.
Or what if they're forced to choose a side that doesn't really fit with their interests?
Right. And then there's the wild card, China.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they're becoming more and more powerful.
Right.
And they have their own goals. How will they see all of this?
Yeah.
Will they see it as a chance to take advantage? Or maybe feel like their own influence is being threatened?
It's like when you drop a pebble in a pond.
Yeah.
And the ripples spread out,
Yes.
affecting everything.
Exactly. My point is, whatever happens with Trump's approach to Ukraine, it's probably going to have a domino effect.
Okay.
It will reach far beyond just this crisis.
So to wrap up this deep dive, I think we should be honest.
Okay.
We don't have all the answers.
Right.
We've looked at Trump's peace plan. We've talked about the strategies, the challenges, and even what it could mean for the world.
Right.
But whether any peace plan works depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And many of those things are out of anyone's control.
Exactly.
The situation keeps changing. The stakes are incredibly high. And we don't know what will happen.
That's just the reality of this world, isn't it?
Yeah.
International relations are complex. There are no easy answers.
Yeah, nothing's ever black and white.
Right. We have to stay informed.
Yeah.
We need to think critically
Yeah.
and be ready to adapt.
Well said. So as we leave you to think about all of this, here's something to consider. If Trump becomes president again, will his approach to Ukraine be the one that finally brings peace? Or is it a risky move that could lead to even bigger problems? We encourage you to keep learning about this, stay updated on what's happening in Ukraine, and let's all keep talking about how to achieve peace, not just there, but everywhere in the world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.